Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to the LL3 podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date is Saturday, May 16th, 2020. Yeah, I just went through a nice little thunderstorm, some potential funnel clouds conditions. But, just had to pay attention. Not a little, it rained, a little wind. So, but I'm okay. Maybe some flooding in the area, but, it's on a poor drainage system. When they believe in 10 pounds cement and a 5-pound bag works. I have many of you folks out there know what I'm talking about. So, people talk about reopening certain areas. In the Tri-County area, it looks like Palm Beach County has opened up a few places, let them open up a few places. Others are wigging out, they're panicking, they're talking about the whole COVID-19 scare and all that. And don't get me wrong, it's always good to be vigilant on your health. Sometimes they have this fear-mongering, there's like their mindset is like, I will lick the boots of tyranny. A lot of folks haven't studied the past. There's nothing new what's going on. So some of the people are wigging out on this don't remember the horrific event on September 11th, 2001. Fear is a great weapon. Road to tyranny. They'll give up their freedom for security and go, yes, I will be your peasant. And I will stitch on anyone that won't comply. Yes, there's a few of them that did, even in my particular neighborhood I'm at right now. See, people like that, they're cowards. They're palmolivous parasites. They love dishing it up when they get the taste of their own medicine. They're the ones that be screaming like a banshee. Precisely. So I'm going to mainly be talking about COVID-19 and the war on liberty. The great article here came from the 10th Amendment Center, and it came out today, by the way, by Davis Taylor. COVID-19 war on liberty has been brewing for years. As it reads here, the war being waged against our rights under the pretext of controlling infectious disease is not new, and it didn't arise with COVID-19. Vaccine freedom advocates have been fighting this war for years, attempting to protect those rights. With their experience, they have a wealth of information that can be drawn upon in the fight. Many libertarians and conservatives have expressed the view that the current government repression related to COVID-19 is a new war on our rights. I respectfully disagree. There is nothing new about this war. It is a continuation of highly concentrated efforts by the state and their corporate cronies to strip away rights based upon scientific narrative that is riddled with conflict of interest and pharmaceutical industry influence under the guise of protecting Americans from infectious disease. I'm a libertarian. I voice opposition to vaccine mandates. The second statement can be inferred from the first, as many libertarians have voiced little to no opposition to vaccine mandates. This article shall serve as my confession of sorts to an error that I and others in the vaccine freedom movement may have made in presenting our case for opposing vaccine mandates, as my rally cry to fellow libertarians regarding this war has been raging for years. Rights have always been stripped under the pretext of protecting Americans from infectious diseases. The tendency of the libertarians to frame COVID-19 rights battle as something new, which is separate and distinct from the rights battle, which has been fought for years by vaccine freedom advocates and misguided. In fact, COVID-19 is just another long line of infectious diseases being used as a pretext to strip Americans of their rights. Our youngest and most vulnerable, our children, were the first victims in this war. They were victimized when based upon a scientific narrative that is not supported by the weight of the scientific evidence. Vaccinates were mandated upon them, and unvaccinated children were stripped of the right to attend public schools and some locations private schools. I know that for a fact, because I've seen it happen during the measles at McMillan Junior High School down in, you could say, the unincorporated Dade County, now Miami-Dade County, Kendall Lakes area. Okay, that's Kendall Lakes. Just to give you that clue. These lockouts of unvaccinated children from schools were the precursor to the lockdowns that Americans of all ages are now experiencing, and for those of us paying attention, they serve as a forewarning of what was coming. The history of child vaccine mandates is discussed at length in my prior articles, including one entitled Central Planning of Your Immune System is Dangerous. Look it up. And won't be extensively discussed in the instant article. Libertarians in the vaccine freedom movement have asserted to their fellow libertarians for years that the scientific evidence does not support the frightening risk levels portrayed by the state and its corporate cronies concerning unvaccinated children. There's going to be a pickup truck going by. Yep, he's going right by. Boom. Okay, cool. I'm along New River right now, so okay, I'll continue on here. I'll say it again. Evidence does not support the frightening risk levels portrayed by the state and its corporate cronies. Unvaccinated children and the infectious diseases parents are forced to vaccinate their children against. These arguments generally fell under the disinterested ears, and most libertarians have not put significant effort or any effort at all into opposing unvaccinated vaccine mandates. Hopefully, libertarians will consider these arguments in the light of recent, obviously inflated risk levels being associated by the same state and corporate player to COVID-19. Perhaps healthy, vibrant libertarian adults forced to wear a mask and locked in their homes during COVID-19 madness due to exaggerated risk levels, it will take a fresh look at unvaccinated children and considered whether any potential risk they pose to society has also been exaggerated and subject to a similar madness. Perhaps they also reconsider whether or not they should actively join the fight against vaccine mandates. Although prior to COVID-19, the U.S. adults has generally not yet been stripped of rights based upon the pretext of infectious disease, except for parental decision-making rights regarding their children's vaccination. Those of us in the vaccine freedom movement repeatedly warned that the battle plan to the state and its corporate cronies has a next phase, which clearly includes smashing rights belonging to both children and adults. We explain that this next phase will include tracking and monitoring restrictions on the right to travel and to assemble restrictions on the rights to use state services and to do other things based upon vaccine status and forced vaccination for both adults and children. Soon, COVID-19 will be just another of many infectious diseases for which there is licensed vaccine. The COVID-19 vaccine will likely be forced upon the entire populace. It will likely be the first of many vaccines mandates upon the adults in the U.S. and will likely join the long list of vaccines already mandated upon children. Denmark has already passed legislation authorizing forced vaccinations against COVID-19, so it's getting jumped to its COVID-19 vaccine mandate. So the most happiest people on earth is Denmark. Nothing against Danish people. There's some awesome folks out there, but their government sucks as well. To extent to which COVID-19 related repression inextricably wound up with the vaccine freedom battle is illustrated by the fact that those from the state and their corporate cronies have argued that Americans released from lockdown should be conditioned upon the masses receiving future COVID-19 vaccine. I confess to having framed the issue of vaccine mandates too narrowly in the past. One of my goals in the writing this article is to respectfully and constructively suggest that some libertarians have been misguided and short-sighted and failing to pay attention to the issue of vaccine mandates. However, before exploring this further, let me first confess to an error of my own. I realize that some vaccine freedom advocates, including myself, have done a less ideal job in presenting our reasons for opposing vaccine mandates. We started with the tree and ignored the forest. That has never been an important time than now to properly frame the issue in order to prompt action, as the states use of infectious disease as a pretext to strip away our rights is ramping up. Therefore, I would like to take another stab at properly framing it. This is old, too narrow overview of the war. For the last handful of years, when trying to persuade fellow libertarians to take an interest in the vaccine mandate issue, my points usually went something like this. Vaccine mandates for children exist at the state level. Mandates are coming for adults. Mandates will likely be issued at the federal level. Orchestration exists at the global level to impose vaccine mandates. Tracking of vaccine status will be imposed, and the ability to travel, the use of state services, and do other things may be based on vaccine status. The pharmaceutical industry heavily influenced the regulatory agencies tasked with regulating them. Strong conflict of interest exists within the context of vaccine public policy. Liability has been removed for the manufacturers of many vaccines. Special liability rules apply to most vaccine injury claims. Discovery isn't allowed against vaccine manufacturers. In claimed progress, vaccines are categorized as biologic, not drugs, and are subject to less stringent safety testing than drugs. Inert, double-blind, placebo studies are not conducted on most vaccines, and there's evidence of far more extensive vaccine injury in the U.S. and elsewhere than depicted by the big state, big pharma, and the media. This is the improved bird's eye view of the war. This story needs to be told from the bird's eye view, which is set forth below. Rights are often stripped away from pretextual reasons. Most libertarians seem to be aware that, although valid environmental concerns exist, the prevailing environmental narrative has been used as a pretext by some in the state and their corporate cronies to strip away rights. Libertarians are generally also aware that this has involved the state and corporate players declaring what is settled environmental science and acting to suppress conflicting scientific information voices. However, most are unaware until COVID-19 madness struck that there is another pretextual reason to strip away our rights that has been hammering away at us, complete with the declaration of what is settled infectious disease science and a suppression of conflicting scientific information and voices. That will make the aforementioned environmental pretext look a mere rookie. This is the great infectious disease caper, which may nearly completely strip us of our rights to privacy, to travel, to move about freely, to assemble, and to decline vaccines. Remember, if you folks are pro-choice, have a woman's right to have an abortion on a certain trimester area, and you support these vaccinations, then you're anti-Roe versus Wade. Plain and simple. Look up that case law, and it's self-explanatory. Now we'll continue on here. Control of infectious diseases is being used by the state and its corporate allies as a pretext to usurp power and to enrich themselves, and they're using a contrived, controlled, fraudulent scientific narrative to achieve this. That is the forest, and vaccine mandates are a tree in that forest. The state, the media, the big pharma did not just start exaggerating the risk of infectious diseases with COVID-19. A forewarning about this behavior were contained in the vaccine freedom articles and in the vaccine freedom speeches that were largely ignored by libertarians. For years, opponents of vaccine mandates have pointed out that the risk of death and serious harm from infectious diseases in the both past and the modern day have been grossly exaggerated by state and its pharmaceutical companies' cronies in order to garner support for vaccine mandates and for other rights violations planned for us under the guise of protecting us. This example of this risk exaggeration most often cited by vaccine freedom advocates that has been the measles and the MMR vaccine. We've pointed out that the death rate of the measles virus in the U.S. has significantly exaggerated to generate support for the MMR mandate. Although the CDC now recommends for children upwards of 70 doses of 16 vaccines by the age of 18. Wow, holy crap. They don't believe in natural herbs and remedies, but they want you to get those vaccines. Let's continue on here. Many of which mandated throughout the country. The MMR vaccine is one of that the state and its big pharma collaborators have primarily focused upon their fear campaign to rally support for vaccine mandates. Prior to the use of vaccines, the annual death rate in the U.S. for measles was low, approximately 1 in 10,000 of those infected. Of course, not every American was infected with measles each year, so the overall annual death rate among the entire U.S. population from measles was even far lower than that. The state, big pharma, and the media often provide an estimate of the U.S. pre-vaccine era annual measles death rate, which is an order of magnitude higher than the cited above, i.e. 1 in 1,000. Such calculation has generally based the method of using reported cases as a denominator rather than overall cases. This method is deceptive because measles was generally viewed as a benign childhood illness in the pre-vaccine years, and most measles cases were not reported in that era. The misrepresentation of the risk associated with measles is thoroughly documented and discussed in Jeremy R. Hammond's article posted pre-COVID-19 on May 16, 2019, entitled How the CDC and the Media Lie About the Measles Death Rate, which can be found on Hammond's website. So please, folks, check this out, okay? It's this interesting stuff here. Hammond is a well-known libertarian journalist, and his work has focused on foreign policy and vaccine policy. Hammond's website has a section devoted exclusively to vaccines, which is a repository of articles he has written on the topic, many of which discuss only the scientific misrepresentations and statistical sleights of hand, specifically being used with respect to infectious disease death rates, but also regarding the larger issues concerning the necessity for the efficacy and of safety of vaccines. His materials include, among other things, a 4-part series on the influenza vaccine and the whoppers, which have been fed in connection with it. Many other infectious diseases and vaccines are discussed in this article. To my knowledge, Hammond has not been widely invited to appear on libertarian podcasts or to give speeches at libertarian events. To discuss his above-referenced article about the scientific statistical deceit being used as a basis to mandate the MMR vaccine upon children, or to discuss other instances cited in his articles of the state's big pharma scientific statistical deceit in connection with other vaccines mandate upon children. I believe that these have been lost opportunities, perhaps if more libertarians have taken an interest in this issue and banded together with other libertarians and vaccine freedom advocates to tell the state and its corporate cronies that we won't stand for public policy based upon scientific and statistical deception. The state wouldn't be using the same scientific statistical shenanigans on us now with regard to COVID-19. We wouldn't be locked down, forced to wear a mask, and the subject to other COVID-19 madness, repressive measures that we're all suffering through. The groundwork for COVID-19 lockdowns was laid when Americans accepted it. when the context of the vaccine mandates that the state entitled to declare settled infectious disease science, and they relinquish control from themselves and their doctors to bureaucrats for making decisions related to infectious diseases. Yeah, when bureaucrats know best, it turns them manure too. Just think about it, folks. All right. I'm just a lot of bad practices when it comes to these these institutions and entities. What says here, with the context of the vaccine mandate debate, the state and its corporate collaborators have repeated the mantra for years in a concerted fashion that the science settled in that it's been scientifically proven that the mandated vaccines are necessary, effective, and safe. This is false because the science is not settled regarding any of this. Nonetheless, this mantra has been drilled into the heads of the masses and largely accepted by them. Straight out of Eric Bernays' book called Propaganda. If any of you who are my first-time listeners, check it out. Part of this alleged settled science shoved down the masses' throats has been the concept that natural herd immunity should be rejected as a solution for the infectious diseases faced by mankind in favor of medical intervention through a lifetime series of vaccinations. Natural herd immunity and the artificial inferior herd immunity from vaccines are separate and distinct, and the latter affords the populace less protection. As discussed here and here, you can look it up yourself in articles posted on CHD's website. It should be noted that the lockdowns we suffered through during COVID-19 have been, in part, based upon the state's ongoing attempts to interfere with the natural herd immunity and to prevent it from occurring. I mispronounced that. Additionally, in the fight over vaccine mandates, scientific evidence contradicting the state's big pharma settled science narrative has been systematically suppressed by the powers that be. Further, those in the vaccine mandate debate questioning the settled science have been widely portrayed as anti-vax crazies by the media, which received a substantial portion of its funding from Big Pharma. Of course, they bend over for them. The Uncle Toms and Aunt Jemimas are calling these people crazies. All right, that's how you got to look at these ingrates. All right, so similarly, we've seen derogatory propaganda in the media concerning those questioning the state-sanctioned version of science concerning COVID-19. But because the COVID-19 vaccine hasn't arrived on the scene yet, it's taken from the skeptics being labeled as selfish granny killers. With regard to mandate vaccines, the state has succeeded in shifting the decision-making role for medical decisions from the individual along with any other medical provider he or she may wish to consult to bureaucratic administrators. This shift is discussed in my article, Central Planning of Your Immune System is Dangerous, and in this video, Barbara Lowe Fisher, president of the National Vaccine Information Center. Americans have overwhelmingly sat idly by while the state deemed itself to be appropriate declarer of settled science in connection with vaccines, and they've largely acquitted the right to make medical decisions regarding the vaccinations of their children to bureaucrats. This laid groundwork which was well in place when COVID-19 arrived on the scene with the following concepts, except as a given by the masses and body of science exists with regard to infectious disease, which is whether the state, Big Pharma, and media declare it to be, and bureaucrats are entitled to make infectious disease-related medical decisions based upon state-sanctioned, settled science. I believe the reason that so few Americans, including libertarians, bothered to oppose vaccine mandates was because they accept the state's propaganda that settled science exists, which proves that all vaccines mandated by the state are necessary, effective, and safe. In fact, there's a large body of science which arguably indicates for most, if not at all, of the mandated vaccines that they are not necessary or highly effective, that and the risk associated with them may be greater than the risk associated with the infectious diseases they are designed to prevent. My article, Central Planning of Your Immune System is Dangerous, discusses this is a website of Jeremy R. Hammond, Children's Defense, Health Defense, the High Wire Informed Action Consent Network, and the Vaccine Reaction, and others have extensive information regarding this. The science is never particularly on a matter as complex as the human immune system. Okay, so that's very interesting here. So I will continue on. And it should continually be questioned, reviewed, and investigated, with new findings openly discussed and never suppressed. Americans should be free to make their own medical decisions and not to have them forced upon them based upon a stale, cherry-picked, frozen settled science declared by the state and big pharma. Purportedly, new coronavirus COVID-19 showed up on the scene, which is one of the most immeasurable number of viruses floating around the globe. But there is no consensus among doctors, immunologists, epidemiologists, or other medical and scientific professionals about any of the following aspects of the virus: the transmission risk associated with the risk of death or serious bodily harm it poses, or the matter to address any risk posed by it. Despite the lack of consensus within the scientific community regarding these issues, the state applied the groundwork already set within the context of the vaccine mandates. It settled the issue of what scientific evidence would be taken into consideration and what would not be, and what steps Americans would take in response to COVID-19. The resulted in the forced lockdown, forced mask, and sometimes bizarre social distancing rules we've been made to follow. It sure was easier for the state to impose COVID-19 rules upon us in the light of the fact that the president, for most of his elements, have already been set in place with the context of mandate vaccines soften us up for this. To defeat the plans they have for us, we must delve into the science. Some libertarians have argued that the government lockdown should be opposed based upon principle and on the grounds that lockdowns violated natural rights and the state lacks of authority to impose them, and further that its approach should be used rather than a risk analysis argument showing that the risk of COVID-19 are not as severe as being depicted by the powers that be. While I agree that our natural rights should be enough to prevent lockdowns, I believe that strategy of not delving into the science will ultimately fail to stop public support for draconian, rights-violating state action under the guise of protecting the public from infectious disease. Based upon discussions I've had over the years within the context of vaccine mandates, I've concluded that as long as the public is persuaded that an unvaccinated individual walking into a room poses a risk to others or seriously bodily harm, they will overwhelmingly favor nearly whatever opposed tactic that the government wants to oppose on that individual. I believe that this will also apply with regard to someone walking into a room who has or potentially has COVID-19. If the state is successful in the scientific con job associated with it. Therefore, I see no way to persuasively argue that individuals should have the right to refuse vaccines and to be free from tracking, travel restrictions, activity restrictions, mask lockdowns, and government and antisocial behavior requirements without, at least in part, arguing the science and attempting to disprove an inaccurate scientific narrative. Knowing the vaccine mandate history and background will help libertarians to defeat COVID-19 related oppression. In my view, the issues of the state's response to COVID-19 and where the state is heading with respect to it can't be discussed in any comprehensive fashion without at least touching upon vaccine mandates. Furthermore, I don't believe that the state's COVID-19 narrative can be as effectively smashed by one not schooled in the backstory of the infectious disease narrative, which has been playing itself out for the years in the vaccine mandate arena. Most vaccine freedom advocates experience little to no shock about the COVID-19 situation for one very good reason. We've seen this movie before. All of the same government and corporate cronies have starring roles in it, and has the same old tired storyline of deadly infectious disease, with the weight of the scientific evidence actually indicating the disease isn't deadly, at least not to the overwhelming majority of people living in the first world country. We weren't alarmed because we know the song and dance well, and also know where this train is heading. It's heading to the same place that it has been traveling for years, and to a town near you with the universal vaccine mandates, surveillance, almost no right to privacy, and right to travel, move about freely and assemble. The battlefield in this fight against the use of scientific narrative riddled with conflicts of interest and big pharma influence to strip away rights has largely been lacking libertarians. As noted, we are now facing a new war, but are well into a war that is raging for years, being fought on the liberty side by advocates for medical and vaccine freedom. Below is an overview of the players I observed on the battlefield on the liberty side during my vaccine freedom journey over the last handful of years. Generally, I have been in a sea of Republicans while attending vaccine freedom events. Those describing themselves as libertarians or being as a member of the Libertarian Party have been few and far between the events. Democrats have been the rarest bird of all at them. This is not to say there aren't many Democrats and those from all parties and all walks of life working for vaccine freedom, because there are. And in fact, two organizations with leaders from the left have been highly active in attempting to defeat vaccine mandates and to preserve medical freedom. RFK Jr.'s Children's Health Defense and Del Bigtree's the Highwire Informed Consent Action Network. Okay, cool. So, based upon their recent comments, RFK Jr. identified himself as a Democrat, and Bigtree was a lifelong Democrat until recently, now associates himself with no party. Both RFK Jr. and Bigtree's platforms made a voluminous amount of scientific information related to infectious disease and vaccines. That platforms are also repleted with material regarding the following areas: state big pharma cronyism, pre-meeting public policy related to infectious disease and vaccines, conflict of interest pre-meeting the CDC, FDA, NIH, and other regulatory bodies, the revolving door between the state and big pharma, and violations of rights within the context of infectious disease and vaccines. Parental rights, the right to informed consent, constitutional rights, natural rights. Ironically, in recent years, these two leftists, RFK Jr. and Bigtree, have often sounded far more libertarian than most libertarian issues related to infectious disease and vaccines. I respectfully suggest that more libertarians should consider collaborating with them in order to further medical and vaccine freedom, including that related to COVID-19. Exactly, common interest, folks, and he's right. In the same matter that libertarians have worked with the left on issues related to war. Although libertarian voices have been somewhat rare in the vaccine freedom movement in recent years, there have been exceptions to this, including, among others, Ron Paul, Lou Rockwell, Jeremy R. Hammond, and Bertine Schaefer. Also, in recent years, the 10th Amendment Center has posted numerous articles on the topic of vaccine mandates, and Peter Kionis has conducted numerous interviews on it. It also should be noted that Robert Murphy interviewed Schaefer on the issue of California's vaccine mandates, and during the interview had the insight to mention that parallel between the settled environment science and settled infectious disease science scenarios discussed above. And just to let you know, even like California's vaccine mandates, it breaches Article 1, Section 1 of the Florida Constitution, and pertaining to natural rights. And keep going here. Goes here. The above list of libertarians who have voiced opposition to vaccine mandates is not exhaustive. But I believe that it's fair to say that most libertarians have not done so any significant extent that are badly needed in this war. Let's work together to smash attempts to use COVID-19 and the other infectious diseases that came before and will come after it to strip us our rights and based on pretext and fraudulent scientific narrative. The author is hopeful that libertarians will work together along with non-libertarians to prevent the state and its corporate pals from using COVID-19 and other infectious diseases to rob us our rights to make medical decisions, move about, associate with others, to live our lives as free individuals. Absolutely. You always gotta look at those areas and.
That's right. The ghost, the other side of me.
Gotta look at those areas because it's a fact. We have the freedom of conscience, folks. And it's not just in the United States. This is worldwide. They don't own your body. Some of these people in these tyrannical statists believe that. That's garbage. Unacceptable. Don't be Pavlov's dog, if you know what I mean. This is a really big, dangerous epidemic they want to propose on us. It's a form of democide. And even an individual such as Bill Gates talks about it all the time. Government in Latin means control of the mind. You should never trust them. That's why I'm highly critical when certain people I see on Facebook and Twitter worry about this whole reopening and they're living out fear and anxiety. They're actually saying to everyone and themselves, I'm a tyrannical bootlicker for now. I made a comment like that on one of the colleagues' posts. Good guy, but one of his associates may not like what I said. But I never try to condemn. Because the whole thing is, fear is a great weapon. They all want to belly up and say, please protect us at all costs. When you have that mindset, folks, I'll give up my liberties for security. You should be investing in shackles and chains and wear them everywhere you go. That's the truth. So I'm going to read something here from Frederic Bastiat, the law. Trying to find out what words I want to look at. Perfect. Let me see here. Justice means equal rights. Law is justice, and it would indeed be strange if law could properly be anything else. It's not justice, right? Are not rights equal? By what does the law force me to conform to social plans to Mr. Monroe, Mr. de Milome, Mr. Dares, or Mr. Louis Blanc? I will put this on my footnotes so you can read more of his work. If the law has a moral right to do this, why does it not? Then force these gentlemen to submit to my plans. That's a question. It is logical to suppose that nature has not given me sufficient imagination to dream up a utopia also. Should the law choose one fantasy among many and put the organized force of government at its service only? Law of justice, and let it not to be said, as it continually is said, that under this concept the law would be atheistic, individualistic, and heartless. That would make mankind in its own image. This is an absurd conclusion, worthy only to those worshippers of government who believe that the law is mankind. Nonsense. Do those worshippers of government believe that free persons will cease to act? Does it follow that we receive no energy from the law, we shall receive no energy at all? Does it follow that the law is restricted to the function of protecting the free use of our faculties? We will be unable to use our faculties? Suppose that the law does not force us to follow certain forms of religion or systems of association or methods of education or regulations of labor or regulations of trade or plans for charity. Does it then follow that we shall eagerly plunge into atheism, humanitarian, ignorance, misery, and greed? If we are free, does it follow that we should no longer recognize the power and goodness of God? Does it follow that we shall cease to associate with each other, to help each other, to love and succor our fortunate brothers, to study the secrets of nature, and to strive to improve ourselves to the best of our abilities? Making us a great solid point here. He wrote this in 1850, friends. He wasn't really playing around. I'm going to read one more here. It's a little bit short. It'll be short. Plan to dignity and progress. Law is justice, and is under the law of justice, under the reign of right, under the influence of liberty, safety, stability, and responsibility, that every person will attain his real worth, and the true dignity of his being. Is only under this law of justice that mankind will achieve, slowly, no doubt, but certainly, God's design for orderly and peaceful progress of humanity. It seems to me that this is a theoretically right for whatever the question under discussion, whether religious, philosophical, political, or economic, whether it concerns prosperity, morality, equality, right, justice, progress, responsibility, cooperation, property, labor, trade, capital, wages, taxes, population, finance, or government. At whatever point on the scientific horizon I begin my researches, I invariably reach this one conclusion. The solution to the problems of human relationships is to be found in liberty. What he says now is memorable today. 9/11, COVID-19, many other things. So, what is your position? I don't believe in left and right, or Democrat, Republican, but liberty and tyranny. What's your input? Hit me if you can. And just to let you know, that is it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or you send something that's interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please feel free to send your correspondence with decorum. Furthermore, I'll leave the footnote of this article and the law on my Spreaker page. If you want to donate, you can go to paypal.me/LokiLuck3 all together. Alright, once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading love. And may your guardian spirits be with you.